then I think we're ready to go, and you can rake me over the coals for making you watch this movie.
Okay.
So we are going to get started in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
It comes from there. It's the comet you see in the sky right now. Passes over the Earth every 6 years and causes a portal right here. But when it's open, we get a visitor from a distant galaxy.
Okay, let's go. Let's go.
Hello and welcome. Welcome and hello. This is Wait, You Haven't Seen? It's a show where we talk about movies, and specifically we talk about a movie at least one of us has never seen before. I'm your host, Travis, a.k.a. TV's Travis. This is episode number 228, and we are in week 2 of Cage-A-Palooza 2023, our yearly celebration of the wonderful Nick Cage. So, I brought back from the Nerd Nest, Bill. You were on, I think, the first or second Cage-A-Palooza, if I remember correctly.
I don't know which one it was, but we watched a horror movie where like his daughter disappears, if I remember correctly. And that one I really liked.
Yeah, it was called Pay the Ghost. Well, this week we decided to watch a movie from 2020 neither one of us had seen before called Jiu Jitsu. And
yes, we did.
So the elevator pitch for this movie, if you haven't heard of it before, and I would not be surprised if you hadn't heard of it, is there is a comet that flies past Earth every 6 years, and from that comet comes an alien warrior who fights jiu-jitsu masters, and that's very loosely used, for the fate of humanity, I guess. All right, we're just going to start off with, this is not a good movie. It is...
And I have to take some ownership here, because... You know, he asked me, do you have any ideas? And he actually gave us 2 ideas, and I ignored those 2 ideas, and I said, what about this?
And, I didn't say no. I mean, I hadn't seen it either, and it's one of the, the thing I love about Nicolas Cage is he can do some amazing work, and he can be in some amazing films. He's an Oscar winner. He's been in some just fantastic movies, and then he can do stuff like this, where it's clearly somebody offered him a bunch of money and he's like, I've always wanted to do a martial arts movie. Sure, why not?
Yeah.
And so he does it. Reportedly, he was, now this is a rumor, so I don't know for sure, but reportedly he was paid $5 million to make this movie. The movie's total budget was $25 million, so that tells you a little something. And he was on set for 3 days out of the 5-week shoot. So
I can't say I blame him. I mean that's a hell of a deal.
that's a hell of a deal. It's efficiency. That's some good, that's how you buy Action Comics #1 in mint condition. Like, that's how you afford that is you do
That's right.
You do 3 days on jiu-jitsu, where you weren't even the first choice. That, I think, is the funniest part of this. Like, he was not the first choice for that role. I could give you 10 guesses and you probably wouldn't get who it is. Who do you think would have been the first choice to play the role of Wiley, the weird, kind of supposed to be crazy old man in this whole scenario? Which I have my thoughts on that. But who do you think, if you had a guess?
Quickly, there's no time. Liam Neeson.
Ooh, not a bad guess, but no.
Okay. No. Okay.
I'll give you one more guess.
Harrison Ford.
Also not a terrible guess, but no, the first person, the one that the director wanted, and apparently he sent the script to this guy, loved the script, and then never responded. Bruce Willis. But Bruce Willis was also
what year did this movie come out?
2020. And he was in the midst of a 3-picture contract with Movie Pass for some of the direct-to-video stuff he was doing. And so he couldn't do it, and he just never got back to him. So they ended up going with Nicolas Cage, who went for it. But I think Bruce Willis fits more for the twist that they try to pull right at the end of the movie.
Okay, yeah.
But here's my problem with this movie. Well, okay, there's a lot. But a big problem is you have Nicolas Cage. And he's supposed to be playing the like crazy but slightly wizened old man. He doesn't look that old. I mean, he's in his late 50s, I think close to 60 by now. But he doesn't look like he's, just this aged old man. And he doesn't, it's Nick Cage, and he doesn't get to go crazy. He doesn't get to cage out, and he should have.
Yeah.
That was missing. Like, he was crazier in Face Off that I talked about last week. But
like, what was his screen time in this movie? Because he was very little. He was almost not in it.
I mean, he was only on set for 3 days. He doesn't show up for like 45 minutes. Has a scene or two, and then is kind of forgotten about, and then he just sort of comes back for a scene, and then they're just like, well, you can't come any further with us, so just stay here. Like, they don't even give a good reason for him not to go at the end, and then he shows up right at the end. So he has like 4 scenes.
Right.
It's probably 20 minutes of screen time, but at no point does he do like the Nick Cage thing, right? He doesn't ever get super loud. He doesn't start screaming at people. Like, I kept waiting for that to happen, and it never did. And I'm like, this is the perfect opportunity for it. He's fighting an alien. Like, he's fighting an alien with a sword. At some point, he should have done that, but he didn't. And yet still, for my money, the most compelling character and performance in the entire movie, which, granted, not a high bar to clear.
I'm going to disagree with you.
Oh, okay. All right.
I don't know what his name is. He was in My Name is Earl. And he was basically Jason Lee's wife's boyfriend.
Yes.
If that makes sense. And he was in this, and he was hilarious in every single scene that we saw him in. I absolutely loved him. He was my favorite part of this movie. I wish I remembered his name.
It's Eddie Steeples is the actor.
Okay.
He played Tex. He was the interpreter. He was
interpreter in quotes.
in large quotes. He was funny, especially at the end when he's drinking. Like, he's just like, I'll take that. And he does not understand the old woman at all in anything she says. He catches like 1 or 2 words, but that's it. He was funny. I just like, so the main the lead in this movie is Elaine, I think is how you would pronounce it. Moosey.
Okay.
I'm going to go with that. I have no idea. As Jake. And are you familiar with Scott Adkins? Does that name sound
maybe
familiar?
Refresh my memory?
He is kind of your direct-to-video martial arts sort of guy for the last 10 or 15 years. He's shown up in some mainstream stuff, but always as kind of like a goon or a thug. He was in John Wick Chapter 4, if you saw that. He was the guy in the big fat suit. The German.
I haven't seen that yet.
But he is a phenomenal martial artist and has gotten better as an actor. I will say that. But he's definitely, like, if you are into martial arts films at all, anything in the last 15 years or so, he's been in. This guy that played Jake here reminded me of like the poor man's version of Scott Adkins. In that,
well, I mean, they only had a budget of 25 million, so they got to go with the poor man's version of everything.
It's true,
especially when they spend 1/5 of their money on 20 minutes of Nick Cage.
Yeah, he just the main guy was just wooden as all hell. Like, he was boring. He didn't bring anything, and the character was nothing either. Like, the character was, he had amnesia, which is a terrible trope in action movies anyway. And so you layer that on top of the fact that as an actor, like, he wasn't, I hate like slagging on actors because it's not an easy profession and they got to make money. He just felt like he didn't get enough time to do any like acting, and he was just there. He was more of a stuntman that had lines than anything else. Right.
And I think personally, I don't blame the actor for this because the writing is terrible. like really bad. Like my wife, because my wife has sat down and watched it. I tried to get her to come on the show with us. She wasn't having it though. She said, how did she phrase it? She said it was like a 12-year-old watched Predator and then wanted to recreate it in their backyard. And I was like, yeah, that's it. That's what the writing was like.
I love the fact she said that, because my first note when watching this movie was, based on that opening bit, somebody saw Predator and said, I can do that. Like,
yeah,
it was exactly what I felt was that to a T. That is, I love that she picked up on that. I had another one somewhere along the line where my other note was like more shitty Predator vision, because it was like a weak version of, like, where the Predator vision was, they used an actual thermal camera, but there was like reasoning behind it, and you learn more about it as you go. This was like some sort of vision, but apparently a specific cloth or material can block it.
right.
I guess.
Yeah. And and as soon as you put it on, everything disappears. It doesn't matter how long the cloth is.
Yep.
Like if you can't see the boots either. The
Can't see
boots
the boots
sticking out of the bottom of it. You can't see them.
You can't see the arms. None of them had sleeves, and yet their arms would disappear too. It's amazing.
But where did they get that stuff from? Did the I'm just going to call it the Predator, because that's what I'm going to call it.
Yeah.
Did the Predator like show up and they're like, all right, if I'm going to come back here every 6 years, I'm going to fight somebody, here's the stuff you need to be able to defeat me. Like, is that what happened? Because at one point, I think it was Nicolas Cage, he goes, that's why you've got the Jiu Jitsu. And I was like, what does that mean?
They kept saying that phrase, and I'm like, okay, first of all, I don't think those words mean what you think they mean, because
right.
like there was, they got to a scene in the woods towards the end of the movie with one of the like unnamed characters that didn't show up until an hour and 20 minutes into the movie, and then suddenly he's there, and I'm like, okay, so these two guys are dying, and sure enough, he was like the only one that had a jiu-jitsu based fight with the alien. Like there were actual arm bars and grappling and all of this, and like things that I would recognize as jiu-jitsu. Outside of that, it wasn't even in the movie, so that cracked me up a lot. Oh man, the writing for this, and I'm putting writing in quotes because it felt like somebody did sort of, you know, like the improv idea of like yes and.
Oh yeah,
it felt like that in a script form. Like they wrote the blurb for what they wanted the concept of the movie, because honestly, the core concept of an alien fighting humans for whatever reason, not terrible as far as like cheesy B sci-fi movies go.
Yeah.
I've heard much worse, but it's like they wrote that out and they were just like, okay, yes, and a fight scene, yes, and a fight scene, and that was their script, and that's all they had, because the dialogue is mostly terrible, but the scenes don't make sense from scene to scene either, and that's the hard part.
Not at all.
Like, what's the army doing there, and what purpose do they serve? We're not really sure, but I guess
something to do with radiation.
Yeah,
and the army intel lady who was really bad, and I'm not blaming her, I'm blaming the writing, but the army intel lady, like she was like, you know about the radiation, and they do, you know, Mr. I can't remember stuff is like, what are you talking about? I have a, you know, I just got stitched up, I got pulled out of the water by, why was Nick Cage on that boat, by the way? Like reasons? They don't explain that. Like no. He's hanging out with this old woman on a boat. He pulls him out of the water, and then then Nick Cage disappears.
Yep.
The lady stitches him up and delivers him to the army, and she's like, you know about the radiation, and he's like, I don't know anything. It's like, you know how you said that they did the yes and thing?
Mm-hmm.
After you do that, if it's not improv, after you do that, you should do a yeah, but
yes.
What about this at the end? So that you can like fix all of the plot holes, because there was just so much about this that made absolutely zero sense.
And
I still enjoyed it though.
here's the other thing is it's got the hallmark of it's a B movie, and it was never going to be anything but a B movie, and that's fine. Like the director of this, his previous film was, and the director's name is Dimitri Logothetis. His previous movie was a sequel to Jean-Claude Van Damme's 1987 movie Kickboxer that he made in 2016.
Oh,
called Kickboxer Vengeance.
okay. I'm guessing not with Jean-Claude Van Damme.
No, Van Damme's in it.
Get Out of Town. Okay.
So he produced that. I'm sorry. He directed Retaliation. So the first one he produced and I think maybe wrote Vengeance, and then Retaliation was 2018. So another Kickboxer one, also starring the same main character as this. The cover, the poster for Kickboxer Retaliation makes me want to watch it for no other reason than it's got Jean-Claude Van Damme in it on the cover. Mike Tyson is in the movie. He must have a cameo.
Okay.
It's probably another one of those walk on. I was here for a day, and I see on the poster the Hafthor Bjornsson, the Mountain from Game of Thrones.
Oh, okay.
Is on the cover, or is on the poster, and he's just a mountain of a human being. So seeing him in a movie is always fun because he's all of 6'8" and like 370 pounds of muscle. Getting to watch him in a fight scene would be great. And that's Kickboxer Retaliation. So that's what the guy made before he did this movie. So like this movie was a B movie from the start, which is fine. I have no problem with that. It had some of the hallmarks of that, like the comic book panel inspired kind of interstitials. Where, we didn't really know how to make a transition from that last scene to this one, so we'll just draw a couple of panels. And meanwhile, over here, it felt like there was a lot of scene missing and a lot of transitions missing, and just sort of almost like concepts were written down, but no story was ever really thought out. Nobody thought about how does this work from A to B to C to D. Instead, they just sort of, let's film it and see what happens. Because they're throwing in plot points left and right. Nick Cage's character is revealed to be the main character's dad at the end of the movie.
Right.
Out of nowhere.
Inexplicably.
and completely inexplicably. What was with the band of people that were with Jake? Like, you had Frank Grillo, who... Frank Grillo is one of those characters, and maybe it's because he played Crossbones in... the MCU, but I never trust him when I see him in a movie. He's got a look about him. Like
I can see that.
He's just got that type of face where you're just waiting for him to do the heel turn and be like
John Bernthal.
A little bit like that, yeah. Or Anthony Hopkins is another one who like you never fully trust when you see him in a movie because ever since Silence of the Lambs, you're just like, no, he's like eventually he's going to turn and try to eat somebody, and I'm just waiting for that to happen. And so it's like, that's Frank Grillo. And Frank Grillo's character in this movie basically spends the entire time just saying either Jake or this was your plan. And like trying to fill in. It's that trying to fill in story points with exposition, but he never had anything to say. Like he used a lot of words to say nothing.
Like he's like, Jake, this is your plan. Okay, tell me the plan. Well, but it's your plan. Let's just move on to the next scene. Oh, okay, I guess that's what we'll do.
Like, I just kept wanting at some point say something. Come on. You had him, Tony Jaa, who, I mean, in terms of martial arts and choreography, Tony Jaa is amazing to watch. And he kind of like Nick Cage just sort of was only in like 20 minutes of the movie. He like shows up, he has a incredible fight scene, and then he's gone. And then he like that's all he was there for is it that was another thing is there was a lot of we've got this great choreography or an interesting idea, we're going to film that, but we have nothing to make it make any sense and there's no purpose behind it. Like the first person camera.
Oh yeah, that my wife was very irritated by the first person camera because it was so inconsistent. There was one thing that I did appreciate. There was moments where it went into first person and you're like, oh, okay, this is different. But then it stopped being first person and like Jake would run past the camera again. And it was like, you were like, oh, okay, that was weird. Wait, were we watching Jake just a second ago? Or were we watching somebody else? Like, did the person fall down and now we're like, it took me out of the movie. And I get what they were going for with that, but it didn't work. And they only did it for, I'm going to say, like, just at the beginning, right? I don't think they ever went back to it after the army scene.
No. And that's where, all right, so I oftentimes find myself defending Michael Bay as a director, not because I think his films are great, but I think as a visual director, someone like Michael Bay is very good at his craft. And
sure.
And when he's making something, an action sequence, a set piece, something like that, he's always been very good at the geography of it and the way he shoots things and the way he works with his DP and everybody to make things look visually interesting. And I think that what happens is you get some directors who have this cool idea of something that to try, but there's no purpose behind putting it in the movie as part of the film itself. It's just kind of a neat idea in a vacuum. The handheld camera long takes that they were doing for a lot of that early sequence where Tony Jaa shows up to rescue Jake, to get him out of the army camp, look visually in a vacuum look pretty cool because it's very frenetic. It's very energetic. You're right inside the fight. They're long takes, but they're not too in tight. They're not too much like Bourne Supremacy, where in that era where everything was in close shaky cam and you couldn't see anything. They're handheld, so they're a little bit shaky, but in like the sense of somebody following the action moving around. The problem with it was it didn't fit the tone of anything else that was going on. Like you said, it takes you out of what you're watching because it all of a sudden shifts to this thing and there's no rhyme or reason for it. And then it goes into the first person view. And like you said, is it Jake or is it a different person? Because at one point it almost looked like Jake set the camera down and ran around from behind it. Like I got that feeling.
Yeah.
And it's just very odd. And they went in and out of it a couple of times too, which is weird. Like in a vacuum, I like the idea of the first person. I think it was Hardcore Henry was the movie that got made where it was all first person. That was my favorite sequence in the Doom movie with The Rock and Carl Urban was when they went first person video game style on that. But those, like, there was reasons behind those narratively. The first person thing in Doom, it's a video game movie. Kind of doing that made sense for the material. This just felt like
fan service.
Yeah, and this just felt like, oh, this is kind of a cool idea. Let's try it out, and then just forget about it. And like, we're not going to shoot another fight, anything like that, which you can do. You don't want to have all of your set pieces be shot the same, but like they never went back to anything similar to that at all, and it was very odd. And it's a bummer because I think that if you set it up properly, I think it could have been a really a more compelling sequence than just like, oh, it kind of looks cool. They also, unfortunately, because of the lower budget, the CG is very evident in a lot of the movie.
Oh my God, the CG! Like at first, you know what? At first, I was really impressed because they had the comic book transitions where they went the panels, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when Jake was attacking somebody, like I saw blood, and the blood looked totally wrong. Oh, yeah. And my wife and I both landed on, oh, it's supposed to be comic book blood. I wonder if it's a comic book. Well, I don't know if it's a comic book, but no, it was just bad special effects.
No, and where it got worse was the dust. There was so much CGI dust in this movie. Like there were times where he would hit somebody in the chest and you would see this puff of fake dust come off of them, and it just it takes you out of the moment because now you're focusing on that, the bad CG bullet holes on the wall where it's an action movie, so of course nobody can hit anything with a weapon, even though Tony Jaa runs off of a wall, jumps down into a enclosed space with 4 guys with automatic rifles. We don't see any of the action, and then we just see him come flying out the door. So there's your stormtrooper aim right there. They couldn't hit. Yeah, they couldn't hit him in a box. but yeah, and like plot hole wise, what was with the army sergeant captain guy? You know who I'm talking about? He was played by Rick Yoon. Captain
Remind
Sand.
me.
He was the one. We don't see him for the first part of the movie. Like there's supposed to be a shot. I think it's meant to set him up as like nefarious in some way, where you see his silver-plated, pearl-handled pistol on a table, and then later on he's got that out when one of their treks out into the jungle. He ends up getting in a one-on-one with the alien when the alien shows up, and then the movie forgets about him for like 45 minutes, and he shows up for one more scene to basically tell Jake, go get him, buddy, or something. I couldn't figure out what his character was supposed to be, because he's antagonistic towards Jake. Then he tries to fight the alien. We assume he gets killed with all the other men, but no, he somehow manages to survive. And he's just putting like tree sap on his chest wound or something.
Yeah, I think I completely forgot that character, because none of this sounds familiar to me. I got it. Like, I had more fun taking notes than I did watching the movie. Like, I wrote down the opening credits are really long, but at least the movie's short.
Yeah.
Like, so like, I must have missed Captain Sand. I remember, like, the army intel lady was like, he was the one that she reported to, right?
Yes.
Or they were both from different, like, they were like equal, and there was somebody that was above them, and she acted like she was in charge, and he kind of wanted to be in charge. Is that the guy you're talking about?
Yeah, that's who I'm talking about. He just, like, that was a character. There was a bunch of characters like that. The Army Intelligence lady, who I guess Myra was her character's name. She was, it was weird. She was so antagonistic towards Jake to start. And then all of a sudden there's a scene where she just like, no, I believe him. And I'm going to take him outside and let him go for a walk. Like, wait, what? Why? You were ready to give him like truth serum and, hook him up to a car battery. And now you're going to take him out for a walk? I didn't get that. Yeah. And then she, I guess, dies. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, she has a run-in with the alien, and then she, like, I think she gives something to Jake and is like, keep going or something, and then we never see her die because I guess she's not important enough.
Yeah, when he falls, when they're running through the woods, they come out of one of the animated transitions, and he's just running through the woods and like falls in that hole. And it's where he meets Nick Cage, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But she's up top, and yeah, like the alien shows up. I think we see her get hit by one of his little shuriken, little throwing star things or something. But that's it. Then she's gone.
Also looked awful. Those things looked really bad.
Those were bad. And it felt like they used the same animation for them several times in the movie.
And they did the same thing with sound effects, where they just kept using the same sound effects over and over and over again, like the bad kung fu movie, when you move your arm and it goes, that sound effect over and over through the entire movie. But they did use a Wilhelm scream, which I loved.
Yep,
I loved that.
Oh, you know what this made me think of when I was watching it? So old Hong Kong kung fu films, when they would get an English dub, I was watching a couple of different documentaries mention this, but the people that would do the dubbing for them, for like the Shaw Brothers or Golden Harvest or whatever, they would have people doing English dubs, but they didn't really have a script. They just sort of had an idea of what the movie was supposed to be, and they would ad-lib all of that dubbing.
So MST3K?
Basically. They would sit there and watch the movie and ad-lib lines, and that was how they came up with whatever for the dubs. So
I love it.
Kind of makes sense why so many of those dubbed films just they make no sense, because the people watching them didn't speak the language and were just like recording things that would somewhat match the timing of whatever they were saying in the film. That's what the writing felt like to me in terms of dialogue. It felt like they were just ad-libbing everything they said at any point, and none of it mattered. None of it made any sense. They would start talking about radiation and yellow cake right? Which is yellow cake uranium, but then she's talking about plutonium over here. Like nobody ever, they didn't have somebody on set like, yeah, we have a script with lines. No, it was just, you know what? Say whatever you want. No one's going to care because it's been 2 minutes of runtime. We need another action sequence.
Right. I agree.
Which also, you know, again, good action sequences, the geography of the scene, you can kind of make sense. Like in a good action sequence, you should be able to I can anyway, in my mind's eye, sort of look at like a top-down map view of the scene and sort of know where things are.
Yeah.
And when you get a poorly staged action sequence, you have no idea where anybody is. And that sequence after Tony Jaa rescues him, and there's that whole long fight, and then they walk out in the field, and the rest of the crew like stands up from the tall grass, and just like, "Hey, Jake, how you doing?" And Jake has no clue who any of them are. You know, they had that scene that went on for 2 minutes, and it's like, well, now we need another fight. And so then they have the one on the road where the army kind of ambushes them. And that one
in
was,
the cleanest Jeeps possible.
Yes. Brand new Jeeps. But that was one that had the problem of scale, right? Because they pull up and they're like 20 feet apart, maybe 15 feet apart, the Jeeps are. And then throughout the entire fight sequence, they're like a football field's worth of space. And you've got 3 separate kind of skirmishes going on at any one time that you're watching. It's like, how much room do these people have? Like, I just kept getting taken out of stuff because I'm like, oh, okay, now we're going to go over to fight D and watch this fight go on for a couple of minutes. And now we got to switch back to fight B because we got to know what happens to Frank Grillo, who was just there to say Jake over and over and have one fight.
Has he been in other things? Because I only, like, when I saw him, I pulled out my phone and I wrote down Rumlow, and I have never seen him in anything else.
That's pretty much what he's known for. He's done other stuff. He was in there was a movie that came out the same year as this, Boss Level, that he was in, which is a made for Netflix, I think, a Netflix original that's supposed to actually be pretty good. Kind of B movie, B action movie. He's done stuff like worked with Liam Neeson in The Gray. He's done one of the Purge sequels. He's done some voice work in DC animated stuff. But Brock Rumlow is his biggest by far.
Okay.
Kind of most known. But yeah, it's like he was a name to put on there with Tony Jaa and Nicolas Cage, but he doesn't do anything. He doesn't get anything to do. Same thing with like Juju Chan, who plays the character. Her name is Carmen. Again, a name that's never spoken in the movie. And is
she the one with the blonde hair, or
Yes.
the one with the dark hair pulled back?
No, she's the one with the blonde hair. The dark hair that is pulled back gets like the most focus on her death, and yet that character was nowhere else in the movie.
Yeah, my wife and I were so confused. We're like, we had to rewind it because we were watching, and I was like, "Wait a second, where'd that person didn't they just die? What's happening here?"
Yeah.
And my wife says, "No, where's the blonde lady?" And I was like, "Wait a second," and so we had to rewind it, and then we're like, "Oh, okay, it's different people," but we never saw that person before in the show.
Nope. No,
and she had like a hood on, so I don't think you could see. I can't remember exactly, but I think she had like her hood up, so you couldn't see her hair. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Something like that.
It was weird. That's a weird movie.
it was like Juju Chan as Carmen. She's the love interest, but again, you're dealing with a character who has amnesia, so he doesn't know who she is at all. And the movie does nothing to like help his amnesia at any point. It's just sort of a convenient let him be a blank slate type of thing.
Yeah, it would have been better if he was started to fall for Army intelligence lady.
Yeah, something.
And then Carmen shows up and she's like, "What are you doing? You're supposed to, you're my guy." And that would have been a more interesting dynamic, and it would have made it so that they didn't have to lean on the not poorly choreographed, but poorly shot action sequences.
Yeah. I mean, but that would require character development and a writing process, which they didn't have time for.
Right.
They only had 5 weeks to shoot this movie. And poor Jake gets the most head trauma of, like, how did he survive the opening? That's what I want to know. Because he jumps off
when
that
he was
cliff.
in the water.
Well, yeah, because he jumps off that cliff, hits the water, and then hits a rock underwater.
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
Because my note was, oh, well, he's dead. You know, I thought it was just like
Right.
some rando character to start the movie off, and then we'd meet our actual protagonist after the opening credits. But no, it was him. It was Jake, even though he clocked his head. Like, and then he gets hit in the head a couple more times because somebody, I think it's Captain Sands, knocks him out and then wakes him up. And that was another thing is, all right, I don't, you know, B sci-fi movies, plot holes, that's one thing. At least try, put in the most token of efforts to stick to some sort of internal logic in your movie. And this one didn't even try that. Like, when they're walking along and Nick Cage is giving him the background of sort of where everything came from, and they mention at that point, they say, you know, we have to do this before sundown. And he's like, well, what happens after sundown? Everyone dies, right? The alien doesn't get his fight, and he starts killing everything. And then he immediately gets knocked unconscious and wakes up, and it's dark. So it's after sundown. So why is the alien doing any of what he does for the rest of the movie? He should have just been on a scorched earth rampage at that point.
I didn't even catch that.
I'm like, oh, it's dark. How is it? Why isn't the alien just killing everything? So
and then there was a flashback, and flashback Nicolas Cage didn't look like Nicolas Cage. It was a completely different dude.
Mm-hmm.
Am I wrong? Was that supposed to be Nick Cage?
I think so. It's hard to say because at one point Nick Cage tells him when they're sitting around that campfire that you know, he has to do this thing and the stories will be told for generations, just like with me 6 years ago.
Right.
I was like, 6 years ago? What?
And he also says, "I'm you from the," or he doesn't say "I'm you from the future," but he says something about. For a moment, I thought that he was Jake from the future, like time travel was part of it, because he said something that sounded like that.
I'm
but then
you,
it was
or I'm what you're going to
different.
become, or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, see, that would have been a cool twist to have in there, and has some.
Yeah,
sort of
better
time loop
than better than, you know, Darth Vadering him.
Yeah, better than, oh yeah, he was your dad. It's like, well, he's not a very good dad. Because he just watched his kid jump off a cliff, and then he just picked him up out of the water and said, here, you stitch him up. I got to go back to my hermit cave and sit in my favorite chair.
Right.
And just wait for my son to show up. And I'm going to be completely cryptic in everything I say to him, even though he could have easily helped him regain his memory. Like, there's just so much.
Or maybe giving him some insight into what's actually happening so that Jake understands, oh, okay, we better get on the ball with this.
Yeah. And by extension, us as an audience knows what the hell's going on, because they apparently they have to fight the alien, and you can't run away from the fight, but you're gonna die from the fight. However, Nick Cage got out of fighting somehow, or survived.
Yeah. Did Nick Cage kill the alien? Is it a different alien every 6 years? I don't know.
We don't know. We're never told. We're never given any indication. And he even tells, well, it must not be, because Cage says he begged for his life, and the alien, who was called Brax, which every time they said Brax, all I could think of was Brack from Space Ghost, and made it a little bit funnier. But he says something to the effect of, like, the alien thought that he was crazy, so he spared him. But again, it's Nick Cage being as subdued as possible. It's not, you could go crazier, Nick, is what I'm saying. But then he tells him, like, no, we're going to have to kill it. You know, like, or you could just kill him. Like, that's another option. You could just kill the alien. You could kill Brax and be done with everything. And it's like, wow, nobody ever thought of that before.
Right. Why didn't you do that, Nick Cage?
Yeah. If you're crazy, you could have caught him off guard.
Thanks for nothing, Dad.
Also, I wonder how long this has been going on for. Like, we don't really have a feel for the timeline. It seems like it's present day with the Army, but the Army, obviously, this was an Army in terms of, U.S. Army in terms of, like, they're wearing camo.
Right,
because
right.
it didn't look anything like that. But like we don't have a sense of like what year it is when this is happening. How long has it been going on? Does anyone else in the world know? Like because
You
everything
think if
was,
it's happening every 6 years.
you'd think so, especially with as close as that comet was. Because that comet in
Yeah.
the sky was gigantic. That thing was like you could reach out and touch it. It was
Yeah.
closer than the International Space Station.
Right. And so my wife was looking at her phone at the very beginning, and so she didn't see the opening moment where you can see the comet flying past and there's like a satellite there.
Yeah.
And then there's people, and then Jake is like running through the woods and he's got the shurikens or whatever coming after him. It reminded me of like the things from Hellraiser.
Yeah, a little bit.
But like he's got those things chasing him down in the woods, and then he gets picked up on a boat or whatever, and then suddenly it's like modern day with the army, and she's like, what the hell is happening here? Is this when is this happening? I was like, oh well, this is modern day. That we saw that at the beginning. And so like she missed that.
Oh, okay.
But
So
if like if you didn't see the satellite in space between Earth and the comet, you wouldn't have known for the first 10 minutes
No, not
that
really.
this was modern day. And so it was very weird.
It was. I also like to, and I noticed this, the first shot with the comet, it almost feels like the comet comes into frame and like halts for a second and then decides to move forward, like it's sentient. And if you ever do watch this again, check for that right at the beginning. It looks like the comet kind of comes into frame and sort of stalls and is like, all right, now I'm going to make my move, and then moves in towards Earth. It was very strange. But the effects budget, you know, you gave $5 million to Nick Cage. They didn't have an effects budget at that point, so you can only do so much. And yet, for all this kind of slagging off on the movie that we're doing, I had a good time with it. It was a goofy, silly, weird movie that
Yeah, absolutely. I there were points I actually enjoyed, even though it was objectively bad.
yes, the choreography was good. The fighting, like when you put Tony Jaa in your movie, you're going to get some good stuff because the guy just he can't do bad. All of that, the set pieces were fine. There was just nothing to string them together. What they tried to use was just sort of. There was also the weird thing in the forest scene when Brax attacks them, that all of a sudden we got like kept cutting between 3 or 4 different characters that had the camera rig where the camera is mounted to their shoulders and chest and then pointed straight at their face. And so on like a gimbal, so wherever they move, you know, it's just the background moving and their head is like perfectly still. And they did that, and it was
it's like
and it was just so out of nowhere that happened, kind of like the first person thing where it was like somebody thought, oh, this would be a cool idea, but then there's nothing setting you up for it. It happens and it's over with so quickly, and they just kind of forget about it. It was really weird, and it again took me out of that moment because it just felt so different from the rest of the movie. That
that was a really weird choice. I almost feel like they could have combined the first person move with that weird almost reverse shot.
Yeah.
Almost split screen, or have one person moving towards them in first person, and then like they fight for a second and you have it switch to the other person with the camera on a gimbal on their chest. It was just a lot of weird choices. Like they sat down and they said, what are some cool things that we can do that it would be interesting camera work? And they did that, but they didn't think of good reasons why. It's like when you watch a YouTube video and they put like one of those crazy transitions every 15 seconds, or when a student makes a PowerPoint and the PowerPoint has 4,000 animations per slide in it.
Yep.
It's just distracting.
Yeah. I was reminded of the second Ghost Rider film, Spirit of Vengeance, because there was a lot of that in there where it was 2 directors. I think they're Taylor and Neveldine, I think are their last names. but they had some really cool ideas of like ways to shoot action sequences and stuff like that, and getting the camera in real close and all of that kind of stuff. But there was no reason for it, and so that was a arguably better version of kind of what this movie was trying to do. At least its story sort of held together. It's not good, but it makes a lot more sense than this. And I love high concept, kind of mid to low budget sci-fi movies. It's something that, even if they're mostly direct to video, direct to streaming services now, we used to get some of them in theaters. Like No Escape is the one that comes to mind, because it was one I saw recently for the first time, where that was a mid-90s kind of action sci-fi movie with sort of a middle budget. It's got Ray Liotta in it, and it's not a great movie, but it's a fun action piece. And you can have fun with these, but even that has a story that makes sense all the way through. And for a $25 million movie, maybe spend a little bit more time writing out and at least thread your story together. It doesn't have to be great, but give us something that makes sense from kind of action set piece to action set piece. Because that's what like Jackie Chan made a career doing that. None of his movies are going to win any writing awards, but at least the story sort of made sense going through. There was a narrative there that tied together the set pieces.
Yeah.
And it just felt like...
Do you think this... Go ahead.
It just felt like ad-libbing dialogue. And then we're like, well, they're just figuring, well, we'll fix it in post. We'll edit it together. It'll be fine. No one will care. And I just...
Yeah. Do you think... I mean, nothing against Nick Cage, because I love Nicolas Cage, but do you think he brought anything to this movie at all? Like, if they put some other actor in that role, does this movie change a little?
That's tough, because he has like a weird presence that just is unique to him. However, I can think of probably a half dozen different people off the top of my head that you could have inserted into the role that he played here, and the movie doesn't change at all. It's not any better or any worse. Like you mentioned Liam Neeson,
Right.
Harrison Ford. We talked Bruce Willis. You could put, there's a whole lot of that sort of actor, those kinds of people. Even like, I think of Scott Adkins. He's not old enough yet to do that, but he's getting there. But like a Keanu Reeves is somebody who you could have plopped into that, and he could have just shown up for a couple of days. It's going to be different. Like all of these people are going to make something different about it.
Yeah.
But
what I mean is,
I don't think it's any better.
Get rid of
or
the big
worse.
names. Get rid of the big names. Do you think, like, because the rest of the film, other than like the people who you mentioned, like that are names that people know, like the main guy Jake, like you get a guy like him, nobody friggin' knows who that guy is. You put somebody like that, just an older person, in the Nick Cage role. Does it change it? Because I didn't feel like we got anything out of Nicolas Cage in this movie.
We didn't. However, he got us to watch it. His name being on the bill is what got us to watch this movie. So I think that with that being said, if you take it away and you just make it random person playing that character, the movie itself in a vacuum, no different. It really isn't. But I'm not watching it probably because I don't care, because I have nothing about that draws me in. Whereas I need something to hook me. And like him being in the movie does that. You know, it's tough though. It's tough because I have watched. I think it's because it's not based on a property I'm familiar with. So would I have stumbled across it at some point? It's like a movie party with some friends, and somebody's like, "Hey, there's this weird movie from 2020. Let's check it out." Maybe, but it being Nick Cage in it instantly gets you, all right, well, at least I'm curious to see what is he going to do. And then he doesn't do much of anything. And then you find out.
I just wonder if the movie would have been better if they didn't spend a fifth of their budget on Nicolas Cage, and then they were able to, I don't know, polish up the script more, or come up with scenes that make a little bit more sense, or fix the CGI, or instead of using CGI, use squibs for some of the special effects. Like, all of that stuff had to be cut back because they didn't have the money. Like, it's clear that they didn't have the money.
Yeah.
Because they gave a fifth of their budget to Nicolas Cage. Nothing against Nicolas Cage for that, though. Like, get the dollars. I'd have done the same thing if I were famous.
And one of the things too, when I was watching the movies, as the studio names come up at the beginning, you always see those. One of them was such and such investments corporation, and I was like, oh, that's not a good sign. Like, that doesn't instill a lot in me when I see just like,
that's too funny,
something investments. You make a good point, and I don't think you're wrong either. But I do think they wanted that name recognition to sort of get their foot in the door. But I think that when it comes down to it, it's the writer, and in this case, producer, director, writer is one person. So
right, it's a passion project for this guy,
and for that to be so poorly written tells me he needs to collaborate with somebody else and take some of that money and funnel it into writing to make something a little bit better. So you're kind of right there. So it's kind of it's like,
what's funny?
It's a 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Do you make the writing and everything a little bit better and try to put out a better quality product, or do you take some of that in hopes that you can do good enough, but also have the name recognition to get more people to see your thing? Because there's so many layers of bad movies, right? Of like objectively just bad movies. There's so many different kinds. This falls into the category for me of the people really wanted it to be a decent movie. They were putting in there was desire to have it well made. They just didn't have it. They didn't have enough. Like they didn't have enough money. They didn't have enough experience. Whatever it is, this isn't like, for me. It's so much worse when I watch movies that are trying to be bad movies. Sort of your like Sharknadoes, or a lot of the the Asylum movies for me are like, I watch them, I see them with friends, but they're not something that I seek out because it's not trying to make like a good movie. They're trying to either cash in on name recognition of another property, aka Transmorphers. Yeah.
Where I almost picked that up at the stupid Blockbuster 400 times. Oh, that's disappointing.
Like, I watched a movie recently because when you got done watching this, I loved your post on, I think it was Threads, where you said, I've just watched the worst movie I've ever seen and I blame Travis. It's like, that's fair. And when I said I watched something worse, I'm not going to give away the title because it's going to be our next episode of Gore. But the movie we watched for that makes this look so much better, in part because that was trying to fill that camp role, and camp is a tough thing to do well. When it's done well, it's like parody in camp and sort of that kind of thing. When it's done well, you get really good stuff. Hot Fuzz is great parody. Stuff that John Waters has done is good camp. I've seen good campy things, horror movies. Like, some of the Friday the 13th sequels leaned into the campiness. Jason X being one, they just leaned into the ridiculousness of Jason Voorhees in space. Like, cool, go for it. And when it's crafted well, it can be fun. But when it's not, or when it's just sort of lazy, that's what gets me. This didn't feel lazy so much as inept. Jiu Jitsu.
Yeah. I agree. I feel like when watching this, I feel like everybody was doing their absolute best.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody was phoning it in. They just aren't at the level or didn't have the time to do it. Like, earlier you said in the universe, if it's sundown, we're all dead, and then it's nighttime. The way that I look at that, I almost feel like they're like, they just couldn't get the shots done fast enough.
Yeah.
And It was their last day, and they were like, "All right, we got to do night shoots, guys. Sorry." So then they did them, and then in post they're like, "Oh no, it's supposed to be daytime still."
In fact, I would even say it's probably just as likely that they shot all of that nighttime stuff and then we're shooting that scene and threw that line in there about making sure they get it done before sundown, not thinking about we've already shot that part of the movie and it's at night and whatever, we'll just deal with it, because then like the next scene it'll be hazy sunset. Sure, why not? We'll just go with that. Like,
yeah, I ran into this exact issue earlier today. I was shooting an ad for one of my YouTube videos, and a lot of times I do these ads where I talk to myself. So like I'll be sitting here having a conversation with another version of myself, which is very hard to do because you got to know what you're going to say ahead of time. And I had ad-libbed, right?
Okay, yep.
Off the script. And so when I was doing the thing, and then when I was editing it together, I was like, oh, now this doesn't make sense because I didn't say the thing that I was supposed to say. And so then I had to reshoot the whole thing because I was being lazy, or because I thought of something in the moment and didn't think it through. That is exactly what it seems like you're saying, where they're like, it's got to be by sunset.
Yeah. There felt like a lot of that. And you hear like rewrites and ad-libbing and coming up with stuff on set happens a lot. But there's usually somebody who has the job of script supervisor who's like, okay, but keep in mind this is in the script, or we've already shot this, we might need to, they probably didn't have time to do reshoots for this movie. They certainly didn't have any budget
I wouldn't
to
think
do
so.
reshoots. And so yeah, when you're doing a lot of ad-libbing and a lot of making it up on the fly, you run into plot holes. That's just going to happen. And unless you're the Deadpool movie and you can just wink at the camera and say, haha, what a funny lazy piece of writing that was, you're gonna get that, and it's fine. Like, end of the day, I don't mourn the time I spent watching Jiu Jitsu, because like you said, it was short. It's an hour and 40 minutes, and it had some visual stuff that I thought was at least mildly compelling. I mean, they tried some things, and that's another thing too that kind of leads me to that sort of ineptitude over laziness, is they were trying to do some stuff. They were trying to make some compelling looking things. They started off without much of a script, it feels like, and that put them behind the eight ball in terms of making something that I think could be a cult classic. Like, this could have been a cult classic type film in a few years. It could have developed that kind of a following, but I don't think,
especially with Nick Cage.
Yeah, I don't know that this is going to be one of those that does. I think this isn't going to be the Nick Cage movie that gets people going. It's going to be more like he made Drive Angry, I think was one that like nobody talks about, or there was Next or Knowing. There's a bunch of those that kind of all happened in a few years where they're just sort of forgotten. This feels like one that will kind of get forgotten a little bit, I feel like. Because there's just other stuff around it that's going to be better, whether it's Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, the Renfield. I'm curious to see the what's the one, Sympathy for the Devil, that's I guess just released or something. Well, I mentioned Unbearable Weight. That was great, by the way. If you haven't seen that,
I haven't.
That's absolutely worth watching, because he's playing a fictionalized version of himself,
right?
And he's having fun.
Yeah, I want to see it. It's just I haven't gotten to yet, but yeah, it's definitely on my list.
But like he's done a lot, and he does. The other thing with Cage is he does such varied stuff. He doesn't pigeonhole himself into doing one thing or one type of thing. He'll do crazy, whacked out stuff like Mandy, or Prisoners of the Ghostland, or Willy's Wonderland, and then he'll turn around and do Pig, which is a completely different movie, or a Western like The Old Way, or the one that I just heard of. I didn't even know about this movie until just recently, called Army of One, that he made in 2016. I just have to read you the IMDb blurb on this one because it's what hooked me. After a personal visit by God himself, the eccentric construction worker Gary Faulkner takes the decision to embark on an adventure into the Badlands of Pakistan to bring Al-Qaeda's leader Osama bin Laden to justice. if that's not enough to pique your interest, I don't know what to tell you. Like, also Russell Brand plays God.
And here's the twist: Nicolas Cage plays Bin Laden.
So, and he's got long blonde hair and a blonde beard.
Okay.
It just looks so weird on him. But I saw this and I'm like, well, at some point I have to watch this movie. It could be as bad as Jiu Jitsu. I really don't care. Like, he's willing to do weird stuff like that, but then he'll turn around like Pig. If you haven't seen Pig, that's a really good movie, and it's a really well put together movie and an amazing performance by him. That's very different from other stuff that he's done, because he's not just being like a crazy person. So it's one of those where I just love. That's the reason that I like to do a yearly celebration of him, is like, it's just so varied. There's so much out there. He could do something like Ghost Rider, where he's effectively trying to make himself into a cartoon character in that movie. And then he'll turn around and do Lord of War. And Lord of War is a really good kind of character piece that he is in, and his performance is good. So it's just the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows of Nick Cage make for, it's always interesting. Except when he doesn't do much like this movie.
Well, I mean, like, we just spent the last hour complaining about it, but like, my wife and I, they weren't trying to make us laugh, but we were laughing when we were watching this movie. So we still enjoyed ourselves, even though it is very terrible as far as movies go. But there was some stuff that I liked. Do we have time to talk about the things there? Just list off a couple of things that I really liked about it.
Absolutely.
Okay. So this line that I laughed so hard and I had to write it down: "I've got a license to kill you, no expiration date."
Yes.
That is so stupid, but I absolutely loved that line. I don't remember why I wrote this down, but I wrote, "Oh my God, the double bird." So at some point, somebody gives somebody the double bird.
Yes.
And I don't remember what it was, but I had to write it down because I loved that.
I don't remember either, but I'm remembering a double bird. I just can't remember who did it.
It was very funny in the moment. Like, it almost feels like it was one of those improv things, and they were like, "Yeah, we're keeping that. That's good stuff." And then the last thing is the one person, I can't remember which lady it was, but the lady that had the wrist bow, where she would hold, like, first off, why were all their weapons silver? Was that because, like, they didn't explain that?
No, they didn't.
Is that because it hurts the monster more or something? But her weapon was on her forearm. There was a little tiny bow, and she would pull back a little tiny arrow and let it go. And I was like, that was the kind of thing that I would have invented when I was a little kid. Like, this goes right back to what my wife said. A 12-year-old watched The Predator and said, "I can do that."
Yes.
And that's what this felt like. And if you come to it with that frame of reference, you will probably have a good time, but you will not think it's a good movie.
No, you won't think it's a good movie, but it can be fun, and it's on Netflix. So there are worse ways to spend an hour and 40 minutes. I loved her wrist bow, because she would put an arrow into that, and they had, like, all of those arrows, they were these little short arrows with, like, ornate tips to them. But she would put the arrow in there, she would pull it just back a little bit, like barely any tension on the string, and let go, and that thing would go just miles. Like, that arrow took off. It was awesome. I loved that so much. No, I'm with you. Like, it's silly, but it had these moments. You get, again, Tony Jaa in some really great kind of long take martial arts sequences. Some attempts at interesting camera work. I just wish that it would have felt like it fit more into stuff. And we mentioned him at the beginning, but name Eddie Steeples as Tex for the 5 minutes he's on screen. He's funny. He's introduced with,
"I'm just eating some canned chili, Sarge. You want some?"
Just eating some canned chili. Also, there's a Star Wars reference in the movie, which caught me off guard. Like, it was one that I wrote down because again, it's just kind of out of nowhere. So we have this elaborate sequence where one of the Tony Josh shows up, rescues Jake. There's a whole fight. They take on basically everyone in the army. They get out of there.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2 minutes later, we have another fight on the road with presumably the rest of the army. That ends with everybody except Jake getting away and Jake being recaptured by the army, which also made no sense. Like, we just spent 20 minutes of the movie getting him out of the camp, and now he's back in it. And the first thing she asks him is,
who the hell were those Jedi Knights that just took out my entire unit?
and that was one of like,
right,
hold on,
they're wearing robes.
Rewind that for a second. Jedi Knights. So that killed me. And I had to get just a couple of Nick Cage isms because he's only in the movie for a few minutes, but he is funny when he because it's that trope of like the old hermit, the old wise man that you meet on the hero's journey. And he drops on in there, and he's supposed to be crazy, right? We're supposed to believe that he's just lost it. And the worst thing he can do is stuff like,
That's my favorite chair.
He knocks him over and knocks him into his favorite chair. Or they're having a fight, and for whatever reason, Jake jumps on the piano to get away from him. For some reason, steps on a couple of things, and we just get a shot of Nick Cage looking disgusted and just says,
Get off my piano.
They kept towing the line. They came right up to him getting to go like full Cage, and he never quite went there. But then he would say, I love stuff like,
Yeah, I could eat.
and she just brings him like a paper bag with something in it. But my favorite one is he's sitting around, he's telling the story. I think he's sitting around the campfire, and Jake just walks up and finds him here, and he starts talking about the killer whale, because it's just the transition in this line that gets me.
He's like a killer whale in the frozen waters of the Arctic with a seal. He fools with its head and then he kills it. It's horrible. Pull up a chair.
It's that end there. It's horrible. You pull up a chair. Like, that's the
But
kind of
not
stuff.
my favorite chair.
No, not my favorite chair. But that's the kind of stuff that you get Nick Cage for, and they only had him for 3 days, so we didn't get enough of that. But still fun. It's worth. I think it's worth watching. Watch it with some friends. This is one of those, you're hanging out watching a goofy movie. It's in terms of Nick Cage movies, it's like Vampire's Kiss. It's one of those types of movies. That's a better movie, and I think even crazier. But like that's the type of movie this is. Like, don't go into it with high expectations. You'll be fine.
Yeah, I wrote down in my notes, the last thing that I wrote in my notes was, I've seen worse movies, but I can't think of any of them.
Yeah. Like, I've definitely, that was, my note was, yeah, that's not good. I mean, it's up there for worst I've seen, but it's not the worst. I personally can't stand The Room. Like, I don't get the hype behind that. I know people that unironically enjoy that movie, and I don't get it. Tommy Wiseau, I've seen it in the theater in like how certain movies you have to be in the right mindset for. It's like if you're a Rocky Horror Picture Show fan and you go to a midnight showing where the audience is interacting with it, it's a whole different experience. There's people that do that with the movie The Room, and I've been in that situation, and I still can't stand that movie. It's just boring, and nothing happens in it, and that feels like complete ineptitude in filmmaking for me. Like, nothing in that movie seems to make any sense. This at least feels like there were people that knew how to light scenes. Not all of them, because I didn't like the blue and green lighting they had in the army camp. I thought that looked not great. But they could at least light scenes, do camera work. Like, there was some of that in this movie. It's a good entry into the annals of Cage-A-Palooza and the stuff that we watched for this. So this is your second Nick Cage movie on this show. Would you say Pay the Ghost was a better? I mean, it's a better movie, but would you say it was a better experience watching that versus this, or would?
That is so. That is a tough question. I don't know, because it is, you are right. It is a better movie. Pay the Ghost is a better movie, but I think I had more fun watching this train wreck than I did watching Pay the Ghost. Though I did think Pay the Ghost was it's just a better film.
Mm-hmm. I'm with you on that. I think that Pay the Ghost is better. I would definitely watch it again, but there was something
I wouldn't.
There was something about the just like, what in the world is going on here and what's going to happen next of this movie that made it a little bit more enjoyable. Because at some point I'm just like, okay,
I would never watch either of those movies again, ever.
I at some point in this movie was like, okay, just where are they going to go now? What weird thing is going to happen? Because none of it's made any sense. So how crazy are they going to go? And they kind of didn't, but I think this was the more enjoyable of the two movies for sure.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah,
agree with that.
that's Jiu Jitsu. It's not good, but you know, if you got nothing better to do on a Saturday night, check it out. You might have some fun with it. Now you mentioned your YouTube. You were doing a YouTube commercial, but your YouTube channel and kind of your videos on that. Let people know what that is and where they can find it.
It's just Nerd Nest on YouTube, and it's basically just, stuff about video game news and stuff like that. So just youtube.com/nerdnest.
Yeah, and if you're into video game stuff, it's good content. A lot of Steam Deck content, which is always fun. Have you been playing Baldur's Gate 3 at all, or in on any of that?
All day. I played it all day today. Yesterday, we were doing a family reunion, and so I was hanging out with my grandson all day, and then today was the first time that I actually got to sit down and play Baldur's Gate since the early access stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I basically played it for like 8 hours today. It's so friggin' good. It's such a good game. And I think I saw you were playing it earlier because my Discord told me that you were playing it too.
Yeah. I'm weird with games. I have not been one to buy games brand new for several years because for the longest time, I never had time to play. And I felt like if I bought a game brand new for $60 and I couldn't dedicate any time to it, I was going to feel like I wasted my money, where I could wait a little bit, maybe catch a game later on, or I didn't have a computer good enough to play it, whatever it was. But this was a game where I'm like, no, I'm going to make sure I can get this, because I played maybe 2 days worth of the early access in the last couple of weeks, but I watched a lot of people playing the early access, and I read a lot about it, and I'm like, this is me. This is my game right here. And it came out, I grabbed it right away, and boy, I have been having fun with it. It is incredible.
Yeah, and it's one of those games where there's going to be many times where things don't go the direction that you think they're going to go, and when it happens, it doesn't feel bad.
No.
Like there was a moment where I was like, oh, I'm gonna set up a choke point, and these bad guys are gonna come through the choke point, and I'm gonna set off an explosion with a fireball, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I set it up, and then it exploded, and it killed 2 of my characters.
Yep.
And I was like, son of a, yeah, but I had a scroll of revivification or whatever it's called, and I brought him back, and I finished the fight, and we won, and it felt really, really good. And in other games, I feel like if that had happened, I'd have been like, I'm just gonna reload my last save.
Yeah,
I'll just fix it like that. But this game makes you feel like, okay, you know what? It's going to be okay, even if things don't go the way that I think they're going to go. And playing through it, even though I played it in early access, playing through it now, completely different game.
Oh yeah,
so much better.
So many people.
So much better. It's really good.
I've heard so many people saying like, yeah, they changed so much from the early access and they added more stuff in. And the thing that I like is it's one of the first games that I can think of in a while where your choices actually matter to the story, but also to the game itself. Like it feels like an actual campaign in D&D, sitting around a table where you do something, and I've felt as both player or as DM like, wow, that didn't happen the way it was supposed to, or you get set up for a thing and then it just completely goes sideways on you. But also, I just feel like everything you do, whether it's I ran into this wrong spot, like I just ran in somewhere and it's full of goblins and now you got to fight them. That happened to me. I wasn't paying attention. I went out a door and it was the entire goblin camp. And I was like, well,
yeah. And then you're like, you're crapping your pants, dive in and swim.
Yep, exactly. So Baldur's Gate 3 is super fun. Definitely worth checking out. If you're into RPGs at all, I think it's worth it. I can't wait to start playing some multiplayer too. That's the only thing I haven't done yet. But yeah, Nerd Nest on YouTube. Definitely check it out. I love your content, Bill. I've been a fan.
Oh, thanks, man.
For a while, and you put a lot into it, and that shows. Like the quality of the content is great. So definitely check that out. This show, if you like it, I stream it live Sunday nights, twitch.tv/TVsTravis. We are in week 2 of Cage-A-Palooza. Next week, JF DeBoe's coming back. We're going to talk about Renfield. I finally get to watch Renfield. I have been, he got a hold of me like 2 weeks before the movie came out in theaters and said, hey, I want to come on in August and talk about this movie. And he went and saw it opening night. And so I have had to sit here and not watch it for months. And it's been killing me.
Oh, man.
It has just been driving me. So I get to watch it finally. I cannot wait. So that's next week. The show comes out as a podcast on Wednesdays, anywhere you get your podcasts. You can, or you can go to tvstravis.com is the easiest way because I don't know SEO. So searching for things with punctuation in it is always difficult. And I did that with the title of this show like an idiot. But now I'm 200 episodes in. I can't change it. So, but tvstravis.com has links to this, other shows that I do. There's a Patreon for the show there. Link to it there is patreon.com/WYHS. You can support this show for as little as $1 an episode. There's monthly movie nights we do, kind of catching up on past movies that I've done for this show for patrons. Stuff like that. So if any of that sounds interesting, check out tvstravis.com. And Bill, this will be out on Wednesday. I will tag you in that. And it's always a pleasure having you on. It's been great. We've been kind of trying to do this for a while, but you're a busy guy. So
yeah, I
know at one point we had talked about doing Slither, which I think we picked a better movie here. I don't know that you would have had as much fun with Slither as you had with this.
And honestly, the only reason I picked Slither was because somebody told me that it was a time travel movie, and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting, but I always ignored it because I feel like the movie poster made it look gross, and I was like, maybe I'm not going to watch that.
It's very gross. I will say
okay.
that. I saw it in theaters.
I don't like gross.
Yeah, I don't mind it, but it's right on the edge of kind of what I can handle. But it's also so over the top. That's kind of why I can do it. But if you don't like gross, you wouldn't like Slither. So I think we're okay having it taken a while, and we finally got around to doing something different. But always a pleasure having you on. You're welcome back anytime. So we'll do this again for sure.
Thanks, man. It was a blast.
Awesome. And until next week, and Renfield, I cannot wait. It's been so long. Just remember to enjoy your movies, and this has been Wait You Haven't Seen. Let's be excellent to each other.
Thought you knew the goddamn language.
Man, I thought I did too, man. That Burmese for Dummies is just not working out.